Hi, this is Paul. I want to keep working on the Tom Holland video, integrate some of the stuff that sort of bubbled up the from the TLC. And whenever I say TLC, a lot of people like, "Oh, well, what do you mean by the TLC? What is the TLC? Speak English so that we can all understand." That's sort of the online community flotilla that watches a lot of my videos. They call my videos homeroom because they usually come out in the morning, and then there are live streams that discuss them. Luke Thompson. The channel's called Whitestone Name because sometimes if you just Google or search for Luke Thompson, you won't get it. So if you search Luke Thompson Whitestone Name, you get his channel. For those of you who don't know, he runs a pretty significant live stream in the mornings that a lot of people come to. He today's was particularly good. It was really good. And so they're discussing. Sometimes they discuss what I talk about in homeroom, quote unquote homeroom. Sometimes they discuss other things. The conversation sort of flows where it flows, but people really enjoy it. It's usually, at least for themselves, a high level of conversation. Also, Mark D. Parker. That's how to check his channel. It, Sometimes we get into these discussions about the size of the TLC. It's helpful to see that Luke has 613 subs. Mark Parker has 220. So the TLC that sort of watches almost all of my videos and discusses it online, in my opinion, that's sort of the full package. That's how you really play and how you enjoy playing. But it's a relatively small crew that's doing this, but really enjoying it. I wanted to continue on this because the conversation in on Luke's channel this morning was excellent. Because of the way, I don't know I'll clip it. I do want to clip some of it because some of it was really good. A lot of it was really good this morning, and I don't know if I'll clip any of Mark's, but I'll talk about it a little bit. And I just jumped on briefly, but let's pick up sort of where we left off yesterday.
But I find this conversation very valuable, actually, because what you are actually explaining, that even people who go, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in Jesus Christ, I reject all of that. But you are still a product of Christianity.
Yes.
And as a result of that, you look at the world, whether you accept it or not, through Christian eyes.
Yes.
And I don't think that people quite understand what that means, particularly when we...
Okay. Labels are super important here. And part of the reality of life is labels are always difficult. They're almost always imperfect, but they're often also essential. Mark was, I jumped on and asked him, I said, how you doing, Mark? You seem to be in a little bit of despair. And he and Ron were talking through some stuff. And Mark was challenging, saying, as if you followed part of what happens on these live streams in this little corner of the internet, otherwise known as the TLC, otherwise known as the flotilla or the corner, all the different names, is that on these live streams, people can sort of apply and get real. And because the channels are small, they get to discuss these things without a big audience. That's why I have to be a little careful about what I clip for the bigger channel. Although my TLC videos usually don't get the same kind of attention that the other videos get. I also know that the second video talking about this will get less attention than the first video talking about it. It's just sort of how the YouTube algorithm works. But part of the difficulty of Tom Holland's thesis, as many have challenged me on and I've heard, so in a sense, if everything in the West is Christian, then nothing is Christian. And to a degree, there's some truth to that. Part of what Mark was really wrestling with is where's the Christian behavior? Where's the Christian conviction? And this sort of has some relationships to sort of this no true Scotsman logical fallacy. You can look that up if you're interested in those logical fallacy moves. But the difficulty is that sometimes when we say the word Christian, we mean someone who's different from the norm. Sometimes when we look at something, let's say like Christian civilization, we are talking about something that is a norm. What was I watching this morning that they were talking about? Oh, it was Paul Kingsnorth and Mary Harrington.
It's a much more complicated picture.
There's something about this word you keep using, normative, which has become. I mean, you gave a talk recently, didn't you? What was it? What was the title? I can't remember. It was "Human Nature is Real" or something, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of these statements which seem obvious, but have actually somehow become radically controversial. Right?
Yes.
There is a thing as human. There is such a thing as human nature, and there is such a thing as normal.
Yes.
Which throughout my entire life, I mean, you probably had this as well when you were young, when you're a sort of young left-wing activist. Nobody accepts that there's a thing called normal. That everything
That's right.
everything must be deconstructed and broken down because that's
That's
an
right.
oppressive concept. When you can see whether there would have been points in history in which that would have been an oppressive concept to some people, clearly. But we're now at a point in history where the oppressive thing is living in a society in which everything's been broken down. And then you have to try and
a normophobic culture.
we're totally normophobic, but then you have to try and restore the norm, which again was based on a certain metaphysical idea, a
Right,
Christian idea
right.
in this case.
I've really wrestled with
without
this.
the
I mean, this has been a major sort of theoretical problem for me for some time now. It's trying to figure out, trying to figure out how to reverse engineer a coherent case for human nature being real, without having to start with Thomas Aquinas, because the moment you start with Thomas Aquinas, sorry Catholics, anyone, you've lost. In terms of the contemporary discourse, it's just people shut down. They won't hear it. And yet human nature is real. And I remember I was trying to explain this theoretical problem I had, and somebody was like, somebody said to me, well, maybe you should stop trying to make the case. Maybe you should just say it because it's true. And I was like, do you know what? That makes much more sense.
Yes,
that is. Say it.
I'm afraid that is the only solution. I mean, that's.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Okay, human nature, normal, norms. Part of what really struck me too in Mark's talk and Ron's talk, of course, if you go to the House of Wu, you know that, well, it's the House of Wu. So be warned, when you go to the House of Wu, expect Wu. There will be Wu. There will be prayer. There will be miracle stories. There will be seeking healing. There will be all of those things in the House of Wu. They put it right there. But it's also Mark voted for Harris. Ron voted for Trump. And so when they were praying for peace in the Middle East, one of the things that they just were talking about was just stop the crazy, stop the killing. And I love one of my favorite sections towards the end.
In ways that are just and responsible and lawful. And I pray for their families and I pray for their happiness. I pray for their welfare.
Buddy. Good job. Good job. Well played. Well played.
Well, I guess she just wanted to drop a bomb. Okay, that's good. Well, that's all right. But no, I mean, I really do. I mean, I've said it before. I've said it 1,000 times already. The way I want. I don't like to see anything burn.
Right. Well,
I don't want any of the kids out there getting hurt.
I'm not.
And
I'm
even
not
Waymoos. I don't want to see even Waymoos get burned.
What's a Waymoo?
They're automated taxis in cities. They're self-driving cars that are like taxis in cities, and a couple of those burned in Los Angeles. So don't even burn the Waymoos. Leave the robot taxis alone.
Leave the robot taxis alone. That might be a strange cry to make after listening to Mary and Paul. But as many people have noted, there is both a, I'll say it this way. This is often how I say it in prayer in church. There are things to be grateful for in the status quo. And there are things to cry out from in the status quo. because the status quo is probably not as bad as it could be, and certainly not as good as we would like it to be. And that's the part of the norm. And part of Tom's argument is that Christianity, whatever that thing is, and is Christianity a hyper thing? Mark and is it because Mark and Ron and others were talking about because we're talking about Islam. Well, what is Islam? So if we can have a little bit of question about Islam, can we have question about Christianity? And Mark was pushing on some of those ideas in his live stream too. Yeah, Tom Holland's thesis that you cannot understand the development of the United States or England or Western Europe or Latin America, or I would argue in fact, everything in the whole world. You can't understand any of this outside of the influence and impact rippled through over time of Jesus Christ through history. And as Tom Holland said, part of the irony of this age is that, especially going back, let's say 10 years or 5 years, when before sort of the decline and collapse of new atheism, the arguments, as many Christians actually pointed out to new atheists, most of the arguments that new atheists were making were basically that Christians aren't being Christian enough, which is pretty much the same argument that Mark was making, that I want Christians to be more Christian. But if you go on to Twitter, you'll hear all kinds of denunciations that Christians are being Christian in the wrong way. And so where do you go with that? Because on one hand, Christianity has placed the normal into being. And again, if you go back, let's say, to the work of someone like Jordan Peterson, a big part of what he argued for, especially in Wave 1, 2016 to 2019, a big part of what he argued for was part of the reason the West is so affluent and powerful, and part of the reason so many people want to come to the West, even if when they come to the West they decry that others aren't being allowed to come to the West in numbers that they desire. I mean, there's deep ironies in that, because to sort of come to a new country and complain, this is a hellish landscape of racism and oppression. Okay, well, why did you leave the country you left to come to that hellish landscape of racism and oppression, unless the hellish landscape of racism and oppression that was where you used to live is even worse? And, my great-grandparents came to this country at the end of the 19th century, and they were looking for opportunity. And my great-grandparents came, well, it's hard to know what my Jewish great-grandfather motivated him to come, because he came to this country and sort of lost his Jewishness altogether and mixed in amongst the Dutch. So Jews, no Jews here. We're just Dutch. Look how tall my great-grandson is. Looks Dutch, doesn't he? Speaks Dutch. So, but of course they came to America. I had a wonderful conversation today with a Dutchman. I'm probably going to clip off the first 27 minutes because the sound was so bad, but maybe I'll just leave that in sort of the regular membership section, and leave the whole video unedited there and just pick it up with a little intro where I did beforehand. But, the Christian Reformed Church practiced Dutch pillarization, in a sense, in the New World. We had our own Christian schools. We had our own Holland homes. We had our own businesses. We were sort of doing the Benedict option before the Benedict option, because certainly, we weren't we weren't ready to line up with the Catholics, but those Methodists, they were a much scarier part because they were sort of seductive, and they would sort of lure us away from our pure Calvinism, even if our Calvinism isn't anything like you imagine Calvinism to be, which we talked about a little bit in that conversation. So this question of religion is such a difficult thing because it is so large and so broad, yet it is something that we can't help not talk about.
We look at religions like Islam, or we look at other cultures and we're like, we're all the same.
Yeah.
We're not.
Well, so that is, I mean, that is the foundational principle of whatever our new religion is. This kind of, this gelded, mutated, be kind, isn't Paddington wonderful kind of post-Christianity.
Okay, so there's Paddington normalism, we might call it. Paddington normalism that basically says, keep calm, carry on, don't make waves, everything is under control. What we mostly have to do is just sort of be nice. Now the difficulty, of course, with being nice is sort of a luxury posture. Wealthy, secure, well-fed, people in control of themselves, they're able to be nice. You know, when people are not able to be nice, like often in divorce court, or when they feel threatened, or when someone is doing violence around them, or when someone is doing something that seems calculated and clearly intends to rob them of something precious in their future. Like if someone's swindling your house out from under you via a lawyer or something like that. Or jiggering a tax code so that maybe a particular exemption you used to enjoy, you will no longer enjoy now. And it's so funny because we're so amnesiac, because in one moment we want everything to be nice and we want normalcy, and we're even going to speak up for the robot taxis. I love that line. At the same time, when we worry about the rise of the machine, well, isn't that robot taxi a problem? And human beings can sort of code switch really fast with these kinds of things. And so part of what Tom Holland is saying is that this gelded fantasy of a religion, it's not really durable. And in many ways, you know, that's not unlike what Mark Parker was noting, that on one hand, things are not okay. And when things are not okay, should I say something? Should I do something? If so, what should I say? And to whom? And in what tone? Or what should I do? And when? And why? And of course, you know, one of the most powerful religious awakening that has happened in the lifetime of now only older Americans was the American Civil Rights Movement. That became the gold standard of an awakening, and it reordered the moral imagination of a nation. But that reordering of that moral imagination is very low resolution, and when it comes to applying it, well, in many ways, all the conversations since the 1970s up until now have been about the footnotes, the application. Is color blindness? Is the dream that Martin Luther King had in the Washington Mall, is that the dream? Or is it reparations? Or is it compensation? Or is it affirmative action? And what happens when it's not just African Americans and you imagine the rest of America is somehow white and the descendants of slave owners, which is just not true, when in fact there are Hispanics, and you know, we're not even using similar categories because Hispanic is a language group. Hispanic is not an ethnic group. That's really a cultural group of people sort of downstream from Spanish colonization, often in the Americas. And that's not an ethnic group because the Hispanic world is just as multi-ethnic as the Anglo world, because all of the Americas are diverse, multi-ethnic, multicultural nations. It's so funny whenever you say American as if it's an ethnicity, and you say, oh yeah, that's not true. Is Mexican an ethnicity? No, it's not true. Mexico is also an incredibly diverse, complex, multicultural nation, except that when you get into many places in Latin America, the indigenous populations and their influences, and they're still present in ways that much of the indigenous population in the United States was, has just been overwhelmed and swamped, and, they suffered, from the diseases and the killings and the wars. But in Latin America, you can go to many places in Latin America and find ancient indigenous languages, or what's left of them, continue to be spoken. And you've got Europeans, and you've got Asians, and you've got, most Americans hardly know what Latin America is like. But it's enormously complex and pluralistic, and has its own things going on, and that's their normal. And then you talk about human nature as normal, and it's just like, we have to use these low resolution titles, otherwise we don't even have anything to speak and imagine and analyze poorly about.
Remains the kind of the dominant ideology, and I would say that the paradigmatic
and even if you say a dominant ideology, well, dominant where? Dominant how? And one might say, well, probably dominant in the elite ranks of the nations and the cultures. Dominant among the educated classes. And that's quite likely changing. This thing showed up on Twitter yesterday, and it's from an NBC News magazine poll, and someone digested some of the numbers from the article. And men who voted for Trump having children, their highest value, 34%, number one on that list. And look at how close a lot of those things are ranked. Women who voted for Harris having children, 6%. And so I tweeted, guess we know what party will be in charge 50 years from now. Future voters versus why-nots. And then I put links to it down below, and had some good chatter with people. Talked about it on CRC Voices a bit, and someone, because I talked about Jen Hatmaker earlier in the week, and got some traction on there. Got this from the crazy CRC community called CRC Voices, discussing the Jen Hatmaker piece. One of the wives of a member on Voices remembered reading something in Jen Hatmaker. If you put my young adult kids in 5 separate rooms and ask them individually what emphatic instructions I badgered them with growing up, they'd all give the same answer. If you come home at 19 and tell me you're engaged, I will run you over with my car. No, as long as you know that the person is not the kind of person who will run over their own children with a car, it's sort of a funny, dramatic, dark, ironic comedy statement, but the emphasis is clear. In Jen Hatmaker's case, don't do what I did. But because she did what she did and got married young and had 5 kids, she's got 5 kids to put in rooms to tell them that. And then the wife of this person on CRC Voices thought about that for a minute and wrote just one of the most gripping things I've ever read on CRC Voices. The post continued with descriptions of how her adult children are living up their lives in their 20s, free from the tyranny of young marriage. Now, one of her kids, unmarried and close to 30, had a baby, and all is perfect. And I can't help but think that so much of the life she enjoys now with her young adult kids is a life her kids won't get to have. I've got 5 kids. None of them have kids. 2 of them are married. No grandchildren yet. Really hoping. My wife and I would have never said this to my kids. I'm sure there's times that we might have thought it, but we married young. Not that young. I was 25. My wife was 22. But I have 0 regrets that we have 5 kids. And there are times when we have all of our kids together, and it's just the best, happiest thing that my wife and I know, to have all of our kids together. And our kids love each other, and they love being together. And these family times are the best times. They really are so wonderful and so meaningful. Now, I know plenty of stories out there, trust me, that family times are not happy times. I get it. I'm blessed. I'm thankful. I'm grateful. Trust me. And I want for my kids what my wife and I enjoy. But we started having kids at 27. My wife was, let's see, if I was 27, she was 25, or 24, 25, in there, 28, 25, something like that. And when we started having kids, and then we had, 5 over the course of the next 9 years. Normal, norms. And I'm not a skeptic about human nature. I'm a Calvinist, for Pete's sake. We talk about human nature all the time, and it's a little dark Augustinian human nature.
Pit that this religion has is Thought for the Day on Radio 4's Today programme, where you will have Catholic priests and Anglican bishops and rabbis and Islamic scholars and Sikhs and Hindus all preaching exactly the same message.
And so I talked about this on the podcast yesterday, because this came up on the event that Glenn Scrivener put together with Tom and I at Oak Hill Seminary in London. It was a wonderful time meeting Tom. My only critique of that night, Tom and Louise Perry were at dinner, because we had dinner after. And I remember Tom Holland saying something like, "My only request is that we go to a dinner place where it's quiet." And it wasn't quiet. You could barely hear the person next to you talking. Never mind they needed an estuary event. That's what they really needed, where we could actually sit down and have the feast together, not of food. I mean, you can have food feast too. I'd like that too. But you can have a super. We had a super at the last thing, but you can have the feast of enjoying each other's thoughts and ideas and presence. Now let's say something in favor of the Word for a day, because because this too, as Tom Holland will readily acknowledge, is the product of Christianity, and the fact that Western secular democracies have achieved remarkable levels. How long will they go? We have no idea. But remarkable levels of affluence and civility and stability, where people around the world want to flock there. You can read Isaiah 60. You can read passages from the book of Revelation. You can read the Hebrew prophets that imagine that the New Jerusalem is the kind of place where the world wishes to bring their riches. And what greater riches does the world have than bringing their children to these countries, because they know where they're leaving and they know where they want to go, and they say, this is where I want to go, but it comes at a cost. And my Dutch ancestors wrestled with that. They wanted to come to America for the economic opportunity, and maybe part of the reason Americans are so fixated on equating economic well-being with well-being, wealth and well-being, because starving really sucks. And poverty really sucks. And they came out of poverty, and they came to America or Canada or the UK or other places, but especially America, I'd have to say. It's where I live. I'll talk American. They came to America, they flourished. And, I talked to, one of our main made a comment about hot girl on Twitter, and some people are like, well, yeah, Raj was the hot girl of the corner for a while, so was Ethan. So, hot girl's kind of you don't even have to be we're very trans with respect to the hot girl in the corner. You don't even have to be a girl. But Raj talks about the Sikh community. They're very, very grateful to be in America and very patriotic to America. And because they've come to this country, they came away from persecution in the Punjab, and they came to America and they had religious freedom and they could establish their temple. And during the war on terror, when they're walking around wearing turbans, people would look at them and say Arab, and it's like, they're not Arab, they're Sikh. But hey, low resolution, right? But they dealt with that and they endured that, and wonderful community. And so in many ways, the West became the promised land, and people from all over the world brought their riches to America. And there's something really to be said for that. And so the word of the day, there's something even in that little milquetoast word of the day, which I agree with Tom Holland's critique. It's a neutered religion, but it is sort of the fruit of Christianity. And that's part of his point about Islam, classical Islam. Now, Matt C. has been pushing back on that on Twitter, and fair enough, because as Tom Holland mentioned, part of, depends on where you stand, of course. I mean, part of what happened to the Ottoman Empire and the Caliphate, that was, as Tom said, the narrative of Islam, why it's sort of the capstone of human history, was because they ruled Constantinople, which had been the capstone of Roman history. It was the city that Christian Constantine built, and the Hagia Sophia and Islam replaced them. And they had their end of history too, except history didn't end. And so, I love the point in which Tom Holland basically says, it's quite a bit of hubris in the West that we think that once the world comes to our New Jerusalem, they'll just lay down their religious arms. And I'll say, well, the Dutch Christian Reform didn't do it very quickly, but some might argue that's exactly what we did and exactly what we tried to address in synods 2022 to 2025. And the irony, of course, being that the winners of those synods are probably much more ready to talk about more ready to say very nationalistic, praise things about America, whereas the elites, sort of the CRC left that has been pushed out, were the ones who are always sort of critiquing America and wanting to strike a prophetic pose and working through those kinds of issues.
One will give it a little bit of garnishing from the Gospels, one from the Quran, one from the Bhagavad Gita or whatever. But basically, it's the same core message. And the idea, and this is...
And what is that message? Be kind, diversity.
Be kind. It's brilliant. Yes, yeah. We're all basically the same. There are many routes to God. There are many paths up the mountain.
Isn't that all true?
No, I don't think it's remotely true. I think that...
I love how that... No, I don't think it's remotely true. And of course, at some point, you're going to have to ask, what do you mean by paths to God? What do you mean by that word God? Which is always the big question. So well known, it's almost seen as pablum. But what on earth do you mean by God? Because you're talking about that which is highest and how to get there. That's religion. And Tom gets serious here. I should take his picture right here, because I think in a way, Tom's face right there. I've been following his story pretty closely for the last number of years, and religious conversion is funny. Of course, there's that Marian vision that he has. He's got a medical scare. There's his life growing up. There's growing up in the church, his walking away from the faith, his living as an adult without it, his the run-in with Islam that he had when he did Shadow of the Sword, the writing Dominion, the longing for... And part of the reason that Tom sort of is so hard on Word for the Day is that he recognizes that this is an achievement born from sacrifice and struggle. And it could be that perhaps the achievement doesn't give adequate witness to that which produced it. And it's a complicated thing, of course, because this vision of the New Jerusalem, where the nations bring their wealth, that's a Christian vision. It's from the book of Revelation, riffing on Isaiah 60. And it's a vision that was, to a degree, achieved. And when people come from Africa and Asia and they want to come to London, it's because of the inheritance. And I think what Tom notices that the inheritance and this achievement, they don't quite line up. And in fact, the inheritance seems to be way over deficit spending.
I think that what the study of history reveals, and it's why it's so fascinating, is the infinite number of ways there are to be human and the infinite number of ways there are to order a society.
Okay, so now Tom Holland and Paul Kingsnorth and Mary Harrington, when they would, if they, all three of them would sit down, they would be close to each other, and many of them, it's interesting because if you take a look at this issue, here you have this conversation about human nature and getting back to human nature and rediscovering human nature, and as a civilization, once again, reorienting a civilization around human nature.
What you have to do is
stop apologizing for things that are true and just say them.
But also stop worrying about the contemporary discourse in a way, because the contemporary discourse is never going to accept a number of things which turn out to be true because it's gone in completely the wrong direction, and the only way you change.
I think that's true, but you also have to meet people somewhat where they are.
You do, but you can speak to the contemporary discourse whilst also saying, I believe this thing which is generally not believed to be true, and then explaining why. I mean, also, I find the contemporary discourse is changing. I mean, to go back to this Christianity conversation again, I mean, the conversation around Christianity in the West today is somehow incredibly lively again. In a way that
it's really interesting.
That it wasn't
It's
even
very,
10
very
years ago. And having these conversations in the age of the new atheists, where no one would be listening, but now lots of people are listening.
Yeah.
And something's going on, which actually is a movement, maybe not backwards, maybe forwards, who knows, but back towards the center, in a way that the contemporary discourse is a lot more open to the sacred than it was even 5 years ago. I think precisely because everything's gone in this mad direction.
Yeah.
But I'm old enough. I'm older than just about everybody on these videos. Ha ha ha. I'm the old man now. Let me go out and scream at the clouds. We have clouds today in Sacramento. Here in September, it's like, no, sky's supposed to be blue. It's California, blue sky. I'm older than all these people. I remember, Paul just said the sacred. Sacred's a little bit of that word for the day, you know it? Because in the 1950s and 60s, they wouldn't have said the sacred. They'd say God. They would have. And by God, they'd mean a Christian God. They would have. And this is why I've always got qualms about progressivism, but I've also got qualms about conservatism. Because you never really go back. You just need the past to try not to lose everything. So, I know, I love both these guys, gals, love. I've spent more time with Paul in person than I have with Mary in person. I've spent 0 time with Mary in person. I have her on the channel for one. I've had her on the channel for one conversation, and then I I said hi to her at ARC, and I think I interrupted a conversation. She kind of turned around and looked at me like, "Who is this large man?" So, just saying hi. But I deeply appreciate all their work, and I have, critiques of their work too. Mary's just brilliant, and Paul. I love Paul's heart, and Paul's just a charismatic, fun guy to be with. I haven't read his newest book yet. Is it out yet? I don't know. I know it's coming out. But my question is, okay, you get this dynamic critique of technology. And as they talked about earlier in the talk, when we talk about technology, I mean, we should almost just go all the way back to language, because it's sort of when language, that's sort of a real boundary marker where we sort of rule the earth from.
And also, people are much better at pattern recognition than they used to be.
Yeah, well, as you say, maybe they've been spending so much time on the internet that they can all see what's going on.
There are plenty of other directions you can take that capacity in. Some of them healthier than others.
Oh yeah,
but one of the
healthy at all.
Yeah. It's and some of it manifests as insane conspiracy theories or
or insane versions of religion or terrible. I mean, there's no reason
that as well.
that a future in which people are being metaphysical is somehow more virtuous. I mean, it's the whole point.
Right.
For example, again, to go back to Christianity, it's very much your personal work. It's your personal struggle. Becoming a Christian does not make you a good person. If that were true, then we'd all be fine. But
and so I can't not hear Paul. I'm thinking about my conversation with Mark Parker, and Mark would agree with what Paul just said. But it's also not just personal; it's also civilizational.
There's no system which, through being automatically adopted, makes you virtuous, alas. You have to try and do the thing of becoming virtuous, but then...
Maybe Elon will invent the brain chip. I'm joking.
I think you probably will. I'm sure Elon's going to remove the need.
If somebody invented a brain chip that made me automatically virtuous, I'm not sure I'd be up for it.
Well, you'd have to ask what they meant by virtuous to start with.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's that, but also, I mean, it might be a little bit like that. What's it, the anti-obesity drug, which seems to just eliminate any sort of troublesome desires at all. So people no longer desire food, and so I read a really sad article about where this woman was describing how she'd started using Mounjaro or whatever it's called, one of those. And had lost weight, and it was great. But also, she just lost all interest in cooking for her family, and everybody was miserable. And I thought, I don't know, man. I don't know. I sort of get why she would want to be able to fit into her trousers again. But I also don't really blame her family for being sad.
Completely, yeah.
Somehow the heart had gone out of their home.
Side effect, the heart versus technology, yeah.
Yeah. And then I don't know if somebody if these drugs just eliminate troublesome, the little demon that sits on your shoulder and says go on, have another one, whatever the temptation in question is, if you can just chemically eliminate that, then is there a price? I don't know. I think we're on course to find out with this.
Well, we're back to the abolition of man again, and we're basically in Brave New World, and that's the entire plot of Brave New World. You can do these.
But here's the thing. I think we will figure out. It'll probably take 10 or 15 years to figure out what the price is. But I mean, it took us 50 years with the pill to figure out what the price is. But there is a price. There really is of trying to abolish sex differences in sexual sex dimorphism fundamentally. There's absolutely a price. And we'll figure out what it is, in the context of weight loss drugs as well. It'll turn out that actually that little demon of troublesome desire on our shoulders is also the thing which powers X, Y, and Z, without which we become less than we were, or different, or less able to be ourselves. And then there'll be a backlash. Because at that point, every time we try and abolish some aspect of ourselves in those ways, the eventual result is that aspect of normative human human nature fundamentally comes more clearly into focus in a way which we had almost completely forgotten over the course of modernity. And this is really, I think, this is the core of my sort of hopefulness about the what I see as the mechanism for the way out being through. In that, we're going to try and abolish. We're going to try and re-engineer every aspect of our nature, and we're going to try and technologize away fear and hatred and vengefulness and licentiousness and all the rest. All the other sinful qualities that we have. We'll try and invent a pill for all of them. And all that will happen in the long term is that people will take the pills, and eventually they'll realize that actually wrestling with your inner demons is necessary in order to lead a full life. And that actually not leading a full life is not worth it's not worth being technologically liberated from those things because you become too crippled in other respects.
Yeah.
And in the course of that, all we're going to end up doing in trying to abolish human nature is just rediscovering it again. The end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time.
I think that's exactly right. I think that is probably also the perfect place to end.
And a note of optimism.
Exactly.
Sort of.
I can't think of anywhere to go beyond that. That is.
Cool.
I think that's exactly right. Brilliant. Look, I really enjoyed talking to you, Mary.
It is interesting to think that Mary, Paul, Tom, all of them have been in the church for less than a decade, perhaps. It's interesting. They're part of this new wave coming into the church, coming into Paul, of course, into the Orthodox Church. Tom and Mary, I suppose they're flittering about in the good old C of E.
And that at any given time, the majority of people who live in a particular place at a particular time will assume that their way of doing things is obviously the standard way of doing it. Why wouldn't you do it? And that's as true of Athenians in 5th century Athens as it is of us today in 21st century Britain. We just assume that the way we see the world is the way that the world is. But it clearly isn't. And you just have to look at the world through the eyes of, Protestants in the 18th century, or Muslims in the 14th century, or Aztecs in the 15th century, to realize and to try and see the world through their eyes, and to realize how relative one's own cultural assumptions are.
I mean, it's a very powerful point. I guess the next logical question is, we've got this new religion, whatever this is, as you've said yourself. But to me, it doesn't seem more a religion. It seems kind of a mishmash of ideologies with no real...
That is what religion is.
I take...
But there is no God.
But there is no God.
Okay, that is what religions are. Let's pause there because I wanted to bring in... So, Religion for Breakfast is an interesting channel. And up over 1 million subs. I don't know how he'll deal with me commenting on his videos. Let me pause now so that if I have to take it out, I can.
Storytelling in a lot of fictional universes. Think the Fremen's prophetic religion in Dune, the complex pantheon in the Elder Scrolls series, or the goddess worship in The Legend of Zelda. But in a lot of these stories, the religions feel more like set dressings than something people actually live and breathe. For example, let's look at the religions in the Game of Thrones series, which has always left me wishing for a bit more depth. George R.R. Martin wrote a bunch of competing religions into his story. The nameless old gods of the north, the fiery Lord of Light from across the sea, and of course the Faith of the Seven, the dominant religion in much of Westeros. The Faith of the Seven is presented like a copy and paste of the medieval Catholic Church in Europe. You have a unified hierarchical clergy, the High Septon sitting at the top like the Pope, and a network of septs across the continent like a network of dioceses. And that's not a coincidence. Martin himself has said in interviews that he modeled the Faith of the Seven after the Catholic Church. And in both the books and the show, this creates a religion that feels coherent and grounded, which works for the kind of political storytelling that Martin wants to tell. But religion in the series also feels a little too tidy. Each culture basically has one god or pantheon neatly mapped onto their geographical region. Now, that makes it easy for us to follow as viewers and readers, but compared to the chaotic reality of real-world religions, it feels thin. Real-world religions fracture. They absorb bits and pieces from their neighbors. Beliefs and practices shift from one culture to the next. They can shift from one village to the next. And the official rules, doctrines, and mythologies often have little to do with what ordinary people actually do with their religion on the ground. Just look at the Catholic Church, which is a lot more complex in reality than its fictional counterpart. You not only have variations across cultures, like the differences between Catholicism in Ireland versus the Philippines versus Mexico, but you also have political disputes, like conservative and progressive Catholics debating climate action or women's ordination. There's also folk Catholic movements, like the devotion to Santa Muerte in Mexico, which official Catholic authorities have outright rejected. And in other cases, Catholic symbols and saints have been woven into entirely new religions, like Haitian Vodou. And these are just examples that exist within one global religion. Now, I get it. Most authors and showrunners are not trying to perfectly recreate the messy reality of religion in the world building. They have other priorities. Move the plot forward, flesh out the characters, evoke a certain design language. But here's the thing. Even in the more elaborate fictional religions, the ones with rich histories, multiple factions, and detailed rituals, these still tend to miss some of the core characteristics of real-world religions. And those missing pieces are a goldmine for making a fictional universe feel alive, complex, and grounded. So in this video, I want you to imagine that you're building a religion for your fantasy or sci-fi world. And I'm going to give you 4 things that every single real-world religion does, but most fictional world religions miss.
And he, in fact, does this. And I'll just run through you can just look at the, there's the intro. We did the intro. Look, I'm using an AI. There's syncretism. There's ritualization. There's religious materiality. And lived religion versus, let's say, dogmatic, theoretical religion. This was a particularly good point.
I have the impression that only a small and unrepresented of water from a neighborhood shrine built to look like the scrutiny. I mean, does this ritual, object, or action make my life better? Does it help heal my cousin's illness or get
that which is highest? Does it help me get there?
Me that promotion at work? The scholar Robert Orsi gives another example. American Catholics at St. Lucy's Church in the Bronx would sometimes bring home bottles of water from a neighborhood shrine built to look like the grotto at Lourdes in France, even though they knew perfectly well it was just New York City tap water. Meredith McGuire, a leading scholar in the field of lived religion, says we are mistaken in our expectation of cognitive consistency between individuals' religion, as institutionally framed, and a person's actual religion, as lived. It may be only intellectuals who care about rational coherence in religious ways of thinking, perceiving, and acting. After nearly 40 years of talking to people about their individual religions, I have the impression that only a small and unrepresentative proportion struggle to achieve tight consistency among their wide-ranging beliefs, perceptions, experiences, values, practices, and actions. I very rarely see examples of lived religion in fiction. Now, we hear a lot about what official sources say about a religion, but I want to see authors and showrunners deciding what a world's farmers, merchants, and...
Now, I know someone who had a hand in writing something for a particular streaming service, and this person really worked hard to try to do a lot of these things in that, but because it was... If you're going to try and do this with biblical material, because the truth is, all of our little mental projection back into the Bible stories usually tries to avoid syncretism, ritualization, religious materiality, and lived religion, even though if you read the Bible closely, there's lots of it. Rachel is sitting on the household gods. Why does the house of Jacob have household gods? And Uncle Laban wants them back. In the Bible is just so I have a men's group that we meet on Wednesday night on Zoom, and it's it's mostly just Livingstone's people. I've let a couple of people from the internet in. So don't ask, because I got to keep the group small, and I got to keep it for Livingstones. And if you come to Livingstones, you can be in the group. There's incentive to come to Livingstones, even though plenty of people from Livingstones don't even participate in the group, because it's like people on the internet. Wow, wouldn't it be great to be in a Bible study with Paul Vanderklay? Some of the people at Livingstones are like, that's just Paul. I think the Bible study's great, but all we do is we just read through the Bible and talk about it. And if you're reading through the Bible, you run into stuff, and it's like, what? What is this?
Okay, we got to get Busatil in here too, because people said he should be on more live streams because everything he says is magic.
Oh, fun! Like, as in I'm a magician, and people.
And you can, if you want to find out, if you want to discover, if you want to go through the syncretism and the lived religion and all of the messiness of the TLC, and you can actually find Dave Busatil's Bible study, you can be there with just a handful of people every week and talk about the Bible with Dave Busatil.
Should throw rocks at me until I'm dead.
Oh.
Yes. Everything he says is magic, and magic is forbidden.
Hey, words are magic, man. Words are magic. We're all doing magic all the time. And if you don't know you're doing it, then you're doing sorcery. So.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to mess up the conversation, actually. That's what the thing that
Leviathan
appeared in my head. For play. Leviathan for play.
Leviathan for play.
Yes. So one of the things that has come into my mind is I don't care about the passages of scripture I agree with. So if I'm in church and they're going through a bunch of passages, I'm like, okay, I already agree with that part. I don't need to listen to that part at all, right? So one time the example was, let your gentleness be known by everyone. And that is not what the pastor was preaching on. It was just like one part of it. And I'm like, I don't think that's actually how people know me. I think I'm pretty abrasive repeatedly. And I want people to know me by my... So I'm like listening for the things that I already go, what the hell was that? And so what I want to introduce to this conversation is, with such a man, do not even eat with him. Do not yoke yourself with an unbeliever. For what union can light have with darkness? And I like all the things.
Who said that? Yeah. Sorry, I don't want to interject. If there's more, I don't know. Jesus was eating with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes, right?
Yeah.
This is why Paul doesn't deserve as much respect as Jesus.
That's what I would say.
Because Paul said this.
I respect Paul. I don't know about that much.
No, David's just quoting Paul, and Paul's not as great as Jesus.
I'll take it. I'll take that as a criticism. Good. But could it also be true?
Yeah, I could see a place for like maybe distinctions without a difference, or like what is it? Something like Gilchrist or something.
What does he mean by don't cast your pearls before swine and that there are wolves in sheep's clothing? I think there's discernment related to that, because that's straight up Matthew 7, but it's like and that's also where it talks about logs and eyes and planks and eyes and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's kind of the heart of the question of how we relate to people either that are different, and even people that are, have intentions that are malicious or malevolent, is related to that. And that has to do with discernment, because this question of like judge, lest you be judged and all those kinds of things. It's a very, very hard thread to thread, because, it's like easily just like, oh, I'm not going to judge, or, oh, I'm just.
And this is religion. The religion for breakfast dude is right. And any pastor will tell you these are the things my church believes. Well, what do you mean by that, church? Well, I kind of mean this theoretical institution, because if you start polling the people and ask them different questions, boy, you're going to hear a lot of interesting stuff.
And what I was trying to say is there is But to me, it doesn't seem more a religion. It seems kind of a mishmash of ideologies with no real.
That is what religion is.
Yeah. I take.
You know, that's. But there is no God.
But there is no God, and what I was trying to say is it doesn't seem to be a core. And I guess my question.
So it's floating away.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is, unpleasant as it may seem, is can society last without this core to it?
We will find out. I mean, I would say...
That's an optimistic answer.
I mean, I would say that there are... I mean, that there are many, many paths, and many paths that our society will take, because it's fracturing in all kinds of ways. You know, there are many, many different perspectives. And those aren't just political, they're cultural, all kinds of ways. But I would say that, say, for Britain, this ancient Christian country, one path is that this kind of post-Christian Paddingtonism, if you want to call it that, it's like the head of the rocket. It's gone through the atmosphere. Everything else underneath it has been jettisoned, and now it's got the power to blast through the solar system. And
it's got the momentum. It's lost the power. I mean, that's his main point, in that religion is something you're willing to die for. And John Vervaeke always asks this question, speaking as someone who was skeptical about life after death. What is it that you care about after your death? And a religious person might say, what is it that you would willing to give your life for, whose payload would only be known after your death? Something like that.
All that kind of, all you know, all the stuff that's been jettisoned is all the nonsense about the Bible and Jesus and the church.
It's just baggage.
We don't. It's just baggage. It's gone. It's drifted. It's, you know, it's detritus. We have now blasted out, and we're going forward. And the secular principles, the liberal principles, are sufficiently self-evidently right and good that it will sustain the future evolution and development of our society for decades and centuries to come. And therefore, you know, it's culturally determined. I mean, it's clearly derives from Christianity. But you don't need Christianity anymore to kind of provide the rocket fuel. It's going on its own way. Another option, which the history of the 20th century suggests, is that the default assumption among humans is that strength and might is right. Power does have a glamour, and this is what Nietzsche predicted. You know, he said when Christianity goes, there will be this great convulsion, and there, you know, it will be terrifying powers will emerge. And of course he was right, because they emerged in the form of fascism. And fascism and Nazism cast such a shadow over us that we've lived in their shadow. In a way, one of the reasons I think for the decline of institutional Christianity is that Hitler has taken the place of the devil, and that a modern liberal now, rather than ask what would Jesus do, as his Victorian forebear would have done, says what would Hitler do, and does the opposite. And that's kind of kept us on our liberal straight and narrow. But that is clearly fading as the, you know, experience of fascism becomes in Europe dies out, lived experience of it. So the kind of the bogeyman power of Hitler will fade, and people who are no longer bounded by Christian inhibitions or assumptions, I can imagine them turning around and saying, well, what's wrong with, why shouldn't I do what I like? I'm very rich, I'm very powerful. Why shouldn't I do exactly what I like? And it's not obvious what the answer to that is, I think, if you don't have the kind of the Christian answers. And I suppose a third possibility is that people will return to the source and say, well, actually, maybe I am Christian. Maybe I should take this a bit more seriously than I have been. And there are kind of I think tentative signs that might be happening.
What's fascinating is I would argue there are signs of all three of those things happening at once.
Of course, and that's what I'm saying, is that all of these things might be happening.
They
and
are.
Of course, we will also have the growth of Islam, so that also provides a fourth option. And quite how all these different traditions will cope with each other. It's going to be interesting.
Part of the attractiveness of Islam is, at least for some people, it's ostensibly fairly simple in terms of doing, and it's certain, and people are really drawn to that. In times of uncertainty, certainty has a quality that's very attractive.
But doesn't it also?
He seems very excited about this for reasons that are beyond him.
I think we are living through one of the.
You're going to get some fascists. You're going to get the rise of Islam. You're going to get these woke idiots running around ruining everything. And what was the other one? The resurgence of Christianity. I mean, that's the one I'm most happy with.
I think we are living through a great.
And kissing, we've talked about kissing before. That's the one I'm most happy with. And so there's sort of the utilitrads, as someone has coined, that are like, I'd love for Christianity to come back again. I want all of my neighbors to be Christian. Well, what are you going to do on Sunday morning? Oh, I don't know, sleep in, enjoy coffee, and maybe get ready for sports. Oh, so civilization is somebody else's. No, I'll be out there too. I'll be a conservative. I'll speak in favor of Christianity, but I won't actually do anything about it or believe it or sacrifice for it. I want everyone else to make the sacrifices for society. I'll just make the noises. Oh, there you go.
A choke point in the history of this country and of this continent more generally.
And of Western civilization.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of British history, we've had periods where the culture of, say, just looking specifically at England, has radically changed. So the Norman Conquest, the Reformation, the Industrial Revolution. I think that we are on the verge of going through something similar now.
Brilliant.
And I don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
But people in 1790, looking at Birmingham or Manchester, would have had no idea where that was going. But everything changed, and maybe we're on the verge of going through something similar now.
Well, at least you said it with a smile on your face, Tom.
Brilliant.
But I was going to say, just one thing. Doesn't this talk about an arrogance of our culture? Where
but all cultures are arrogant.
Right. I was going to say that.
Yeah, but they are. But aren't we especially arrogant to think we can divorce society?
No, that's your arrogance showing, mate.
Yes.
Am I not really special about thinking I'm special?
Yeah, I am special. Mother said so. But no, she didn't. But I was going to say...
Explains the comedy career, mate.
But thinking that we can... Surely, aren't we the only society that has ever thought we can divorce culture and religion?
Yes.
And
we are.
Is that not arrogant?
Yeah, it is arrogant, but the arrogance, people would say that's justified because of the fact that we have the most, we're the products of an incredibly advanced civilization that industrialized, and therefore basically we've got the answer. And I think obviously that now rubs up against all kinds of anxieties about Western exceptionalism. But I think it does, the idea that our secular liberal society is uniquely advanced. I mean, to be progressive is itself a very Western thing. And if you're progressive, you're progressing ahead of everybody else. I mean, a sense of arrogance is baked into that word, I would argue.
Well, it's going to be a very interesting time. Tom, thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure.
Of course, Constantine in Constantinople was arrogant. And the Muslims who took over Constantinople were arrogant, and they all fell. And even though it is one thing that almost nobody seems able to believe, there is someone who said, "Blessed are the meek." Why? Go ahead, watch Steve Martin's Leap of Faith. I say all the meek get is the short end of the stick. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. So leave a comment. And if you want to participate, you can look up the House of Woo. You can look up Luke Thompson. They sort of appear like thieves in the night. Some of them are regularly scheduled. Some of them just pop on when the person has a chance. And, yeah. The meek will inherit the earth.